Find the right one. Hello, Pende.
Morning.
Morning.
Hi.
Can you hear us?
I can.
Okay, great. We can hear you too. Let me turn this up a little bit. Okay.
Full screen.
Oh, full screen. Sorry. I actually did hit record already.
Nice.
Ahead of myself. Okay, and Pende, I remembered our prayers today. So should we do in Tibetan, refuge and bodhicitta before the teaching? So we'll do 3 times.
Okay.
Sangye charan sokhi chognam la jamchu pardu dagni kyapsu chi dagi churnyan gi pesonam gi drola panche sangye drupasho. Sangye charan sokhi chognam la jamchu pardu dagni kyapsu chi dagi churnyan gi pesonam gi drola panche sangye drupasho. Sangye charan sokhi chognam la jamchu pardu dagni kyapsuchi dagi churnyan gi pesonam gi drola
Thank you.
And there's just going to be the 4 of us today, I think.
Okay. So good morning. Welcome.
Thank you.
Morning.
So we have 8 classes altogether, right? This is number 6. Okay. So where we left off the last time was with karma. And so when one thinks about karma, it's especially useful at this time to regard the Dharma teachings like a mirror. And it can, just as a mirror will let you know whether you have a smudge on your face that needs to be cleaned, like that, then also studying the Dharma in any aspect of it, but particularly karma, will let you know whether you've accumulated any non-virtuous actions during your lifetime. And this gives a sense of how that one has accumulated non-virtuous actions in former lifetimes. And how, as there's no beginning to it, and these non-virtuous actions leave seeds in the consciousness that do not go away by themselves. They remain until one meets the supporting conditions for them to ripen. So it creates a sense of urgency to try to eliminate those seeds of negative karma as much as possible. And so this gives rise to the subject of purification. And the method of doing purification is the 4 opponent powers. Is this, have you run into this subject before?
Yeah. Purification, but not the 4.
Not the 4 opponent powers? Okay. So the 4 opponent powers are basically just the way to put your mind when you're doing purification practice. And the first thing that one does is take refuge. So this is the power of the object. So by taking refuge, then one has a sense of that one is being led in the right direction to find a remedy for the negative karma that one has accumulated. And then the next is to generate a good motivation. So it's the power of the motivation that helps one to not accumulate new negative karma and to have the power of mind to eliminate the negative karma. And of course, the more virtuous the motivation, the better. So like for instance, with the bodhicitta, the spirit of enlightenment, that is the motivation to achieve supreme enlightenment for the benefit of all living beings. So one has as, when one is thinking about the beneficiaries of one's actions, it's countless living beings. And that, so the power of the action that's motivated by bodhicitta is multiplied by the number of beneficiaries. And as beneficiaries are countless, that makes the action that is motivated by bodhicitta very powerful. So if one can, one generates the bodhicitta. And at least one generates an attitude that has a motivation that has a higher interest in future lives than the present. And then the next is the power of determination. And the determination is the where one is determined to avoid the kind of negative action that that one did that may have been the strongest motivator to engage in purification. So sometimes when one purifies, one's just purifying negative karma in general. But other times, you know you've done something and you feel a lot of regret for it. And so that regret can be quite powerful. And that makes a motivation, or it makes a determination to do the best one can to avoid that kind of action in the future. So let's see. So regret is it's a mental factor, and it can be either positive or negative. If one regrets positive actions, then that's the wrong use of regret. But if one regrets negative actions, then that's the right use of it. And the stronger that one has a regret for that, for the non-virtuous action, then that will purify one of the effects of karma, which is the inclination to engage in the action again. So with the combination of regret and strong determination, one decides that one will do one's best to avoid that kind of action in the future. The oral tradition tells us to avoid making a determination that you can't keep, like a promise that you can't keep. Like, I will never do this again. Well, maybe yes, maybe no. And, and so you might be exaggerating, and exaggeration is a form of lie, which is an accumulation of more negative karma. So it is, it's a good to say something like the best you can. Or, there were some times that people, they do purification in the evening because they start the day with the motivation of they're going to make this day really positive. And Swami Rinpoche once said that, you start the morning thinking, the year that begins with this day is going to be, make myself a better person than I did in the year that ended with yesterday. So you start the day with that kind of motivation, and at the end of the day, you look back and think, well, how did I do? And then one engages in purification, because usually there's a few faults there. And at that time, one could say that, okay, I'm not going to do such and such again for the rest of the night, because you're going to go to sleep, and it's not going to be an occasion to engage in anything. But it's important to keep in mind that you want to make it follow the emotion, but it has to be smart at the same time. And Lama Yeshe was looking for a word in English when he was telling us about this. That meant that you had such a strong determination that you could never go back on it. And we didn't have a word for that, strong determination. It had to have, at least some adjective, irreversible determination. There wasn't a single word for it. And then the fourth power opponent force is the power of the antidote. So in general, any virtuous action that one undertakes in order to purify negative karma is an antidote to the negative karma. So then, and for instance, people engage in virtuous actions that are the counter of the type of non-virtue that they're trying to purify. So for instance, if a person killed some sentient being, and then they're going to purify that, could be because of killing an insect, who knows, could be anything. Then they might do a virtuous action of preserving life. So like giving food to the hungry, buying live bait at a bait shop, and if it's worms, burying them in nice ground, or if it's minnows, putting them back in the water, things like that people do. So, and then there are other kind of classical examples of purification, like reciting mantras. This is reciting the mantra with good motivation, good concentration, doing visualization of white light especially coming and eliminating the negative karma in the form of darkness, like light dispelling darkness, or like a rain of nectar and eliminating the negative karma in the form of dark, dirty liquid flowing out of one's body. There's a lot of visualizations that are done like that. Also, reciting sutras is also a classic example of a purification practice, such as the Heart Sutra. Not very long. There are other sutras that are very powerful for purification, such as the Sutra of Golden Light and so on. So that is a helpful practice. Making various offerings to the three jewels of refuge. Those are traditional practices, like with the monastic community, one makes an offerings to that. Make an offering of sacred images to an altar. There's many different kinds of actions that are done for purification purposes. So let's see. So we had the power of the object, we had the power of the motivation, we had the power of determination, and the power of the object. And regret fits in also with the motivation and with the determination. So in one way there's five, but it's classically said the four opponent powers, and regret is one of them. Okay. So when you have all those four together, then you can purify anything. There's no negative karma that can't be purified. There's some negative karmas that are difficult to purify, but all negative karmas can be purified. If it wasn't that for that case, then there would be somebody who couldn't achieve Buddhahood. And the Buddha said that everyone can achieve Buddhahood. And like Shantideva quoted the Buddha as saying that even a mosquito could achieve Buddhahood if they had enough enthusiasm. So one should never feel that one is hopeless because of some non-virtuous action that one has done. You just have to recognize that, okay, I blew it that time, but I still have the potential to achieve Buddhahood. I have the potential to become a better person. I have the potential to purify the negative karma that I accumulated from that and reverse the tendencies that got me into that problem in the first place. So I'm going to purify that non-virtuous action. And there's other specific practices for purification, like there's a number of practices that are done for proceeding in going into a long retreat. So for instance, in the Tantric tradition, there's certain long retreats, like 3-year retreats, in which one meditates on a deity, one has to accumulate a certain number of mantras, one finishes the retreat with a certain type of purification practice so that any faults that one acquired during the retreat are eliminated. And these retreats have preparations that are done before them. And those preparations are all about purification and the accumulation of merit, with the idea being that you need to eliminate the negative karma that might ripen in the form of an interference that would prevent you from completing the retreat, and the accumulation of merit, which would make your mind more fertile, so that the retreat would have positive effects on you. And so some of those purification practices are like they're known as the 100,000s, because it's 100,000 of this and 100,000 of that, so they're called the 100,000s. Like, for instance, 100,000 prostrations, or 100,000 Vajrasattva mantras, and this is the long mantra, and 100,000 Dorji Kadro mantras. And Dorji Kadro is a deity that he's sitting down with his legs in a kind of circle with the soles of his feet touching each other, with the knees down. He's holding a Vajra and bell like this, and his head is turned up and his mouth is wide open. And you feed him your negativities in the form of like black sesame seeds, and there's usually like there's statues that are made like that, but usually it's a visualization. And you put the visualization on top of a fire that you have, and so you're feeding this black sesame seeds into this fire, and they're popping all over the place. And there can be other materials that one can use that are derived from more sophisticated fire pujas. And so those are practices that are done. And the Vajrasamaya, Dorji Damsik in Tibetan. So that's another deity that one can recite the mantra and do the visualization, and that's particularly useful for when one has broken one's promises to the guru, things like that. So there's a lot of different purification practices, and they're quite effective. It seems like people that I know, and for myself as well, who've engaged in those practices, find them to be quite useful practices. You can get a lot of energy behind it. And so that's purification. Are there any questions about the purification practice? Yes.
Please. It's a little bit off to the side. Often I hear teachers refer to deities, or and I'm just giving I would request some clarification of. I thought there was no God, and when I hear a reference of deities, and sometimes I get confused with the different Buddhas and faces of Buddha images. Can you just speak on that for a minute?
Sure.
Please.
So let's see. So when I reference deities in tantric practice, so they're meditational deities, and they're different forms that different Buddhas have taken to benefit sentient beings. Okay, and there's countless Buddhas, and those Buddhas can benefit sentient beings in whatever way works. So there's stories of them appearing in different forms to benefit sentient beings, and so those different forms are used as methods to help a practitioner realize their own Buddha potential. So that's what the meditation deities are referring to. And sometimes they can be, actual Buddhas who are in that form, and they can appear to a person. Like, for instance, the great Indian master Dipankara Tisha, his principal meditation deity was Tara. And Tara used to actually appear to him and give him advice, directions. And then he would, as a meditational deity, he would also meditate on being Tara, and to cultivate the Tara potentials within him, become Buddhahood through that connection. So, and like people, like there's Avalokiteshvara, which was one of the 8 close disciples of Bodhisattva disciples of the Buddha, and also had achieved enlightenment in his own right. So there's a historical person who is this Bodhisattva, and that Bodhisattva had achieved Buddhahood, but appeared in the form of Bodhisattva to help the Buddha found the teachings by asking various questions, and then the Buddha would respond to those questions. Like, for instance, in the Heart Sutra, Avalokiteshvara is one of the main persons there who's kind of speaking for the Buddha and answering questions. So, but then one can also use Avalokiteshvara as a meditational deity in the Tantric tradition, where one imagines oneself being Avalokiteshvara, depending upon different forms. There's many different forms that one can visualize oneself as having. And then one cultivates Buddhahood in by the closeness one feels to certain qualities that are exhibited, that have been exhibited by Avalokiteshvara. Like, Avalokiteshvara is famous for compassion. It's not as if he had more compassion than any other Buddha, but he was famous for it. So then one might practice being Avalokiteshvara in order to cultivate, one's compassion more, like that. Or one might, one of the other close disciples, Bodhisattva disciples of the Buddha, was Manjusri. And Manjusri had achieved Buddhahood before, but then appeared as a Bodhisattva to help the Buddha. Shakyamuni Buddha found the teachings. And he's famous for his intelligence and power of speech. So a person might practice the Manjusri Tantra to emphasize one's penetrating intelligence and the power of speech and the power of writing, things like that. So achieving Buddhahood through cultivating these capacities. And even before achieving Buddhahood, as those capacities grow more and more, then you can benefit sentient beings as much as, as they grow, as those qualities grow. So that's where the term deities is used in the tantric context. It's good karma, depending upon how good it is. You can be reborn in a god realm as a god, but this would be like the way the gods are referred to in the Hindu tradition, or like the Greek tradition, like that, where there's many gods, like that. The only type of God or concept of God that the Buddha said didn't exist was the concept of a creator God, that everything came from some supreme being, like that. And the Buddha said, or the Dalai Lama, when commenting about it, says, the Buddhist equivalent to the creator God is karma. And that's something that each of us is doing all the time. So we're all creating our future experiences. So it's not some external being who's creating it for us, it's ourselves. Whether consciously or unconsciously, we're creating it. So it's the karma. So the creator God concept is something that is asserted to not exist in the Buddhist teachings. But other gods can exist because you can create virtue that is so wonderful that the result is going to be equivalently wonderful, and a human existence is not as wonderful as such an action deserves. So, and by the time the Buddha started teaching, there was a well-established pantheon of Hindu deities and the like, so that was all incorporated into the Buddhist teachings. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, yes, that provides quite a bit of clarity. Thank you.
Okay. So now the next step is, as one is considering, karma and having to purify the negative karma, and one can read descriptions of these purification practices that say they'll purify all negative karma that has been accumulated from beginningless time, or just by reciting this sutra you can purify the worst negative karmas that were acquired over eons, like 100,000 eons and things like this. And it makes one say to 100,000 eons, boy, I've been around a long time. And here I am. This is as good as I've gotten. And it seems, and who knows, I could have been I could have engaged in purification practices in a former lifetime, and yet I'm still accumulating negative karma. I'm engaged in a purification practice right now, but after I get up from my cushion, or after I finish an offering or whatever it is that I'm doing, I could again engage in negative karma and be creating countless lifetimes of potential lifetimes in cyclic existence with all of these, and it kind of is chilling when one thinks about it. So is there any way that I can just get out of this whole cycle of being under the control of karma like this? And so this leads one into the training of the person of intermediate scope. So as you recall, the person of intermediate scope was one who's trying to achieve liberation from the cycle of uncontrolled death and rebirth. And mainly for themselves. They're so terrified of this kind of existence, so dissatisfied with it, that they have to get out. So there's various practices that even the bodhisattva, who is mainly motivated by altruistic concerns, will engage in, that are similar to the practices that the person of intermediate scope engages in. And for instance, the contemplation of the different shortcomings of cyclic existence. So thinking about karma is one of the good contemplations that one can do, thinking of the shortcomings of cyclic existence. And like for instance, Lama Tsongkhapa in his text called the Three Principles of the Path. And the Three Principles of the Path was taught to Lama Tsongkhapa by his special guru, Manjusri. So Manjusri, the Buddha Manjusri, and Lama Tsongkhapa could communicate to each other. And the Buddha Manjusri was famous for when he lived as a bodhisattva on the planet Earth. He one of the homes that he made for himself was in China, and I think it's called the Five Peak Mountain, Utaishan, in China. And there are people there who have seen Manjusri appear, even like in the 20th century or the 19th century. They were seeing Manjusri appear in different forms, reputed to appear, right? And but great stories, Manjusri. There's so great stories of Manjusri. Like, for instance, there's one image that I love of, so here's Manjushri looking like a Mahasiddha. I don't know if you know who the Mahasiddhas were, but they were these extraordinary practitioners following the Buddha from around 1st century AD or BC, around that time, up until around the 6th century. And they were particularly famous for tantric practices. So they were maintaining the lineages of the tantric practices. And some of them were monks, but a lot of them weren't. And even some of them had been monks, and then they gave up being monks, and then they engaged in their practices. And they're usually depicted in iconography as having like long matted hair, and maybe wearing a loincloth is all, or something like that, some of them. So there's this one image of Manjushri who looked like that, the long hair, and maybe I don't even know if, just maybe a tiger skin, something, loincloth, riding on the back of a lion. And so he came over the Himalayas into Kathmandu Valley. And at the time, Kathmandu Valley was a large lake. You could call it an inland sea. And he had this vision that this place could be a wonderful place for human beings to live, and that the Dharma would flourish there. But he had to drain the water out of this inland sea. So he went to the southern edge of it, and he was famous for this sword that he carried. And the sword had a name. The sword was called the Dreadful Laugh. So if you think about, a sword wielded by a great warrior and who passes it through the air swiftly, it makes a vroom kind of sound. So that's the Dreadful Laugh. And it also, from some commentators, it might have also referred to the power of speech that he had. So he could recite a mantra, and through the power of his speech and the power of his mind, he made an earthquake. And so the southern edge broke open, and then the water all drained out. And so there are these kinds of beings. They're included in the animal realm, but they're kind of mythological beings. They're called Nagas. And Nagas, they often take the form of mer people, or dragons, or even just plain old snakes. So they have some power over water. So, like, for instance, the people of India and Southeast Asia, including Buddhists or Hindus, when they do ceremonies to make it rain, it's usually a ceremony of making offerings to these Nagas who control the water and the weather and stuff like this. So because the water was all leaving, then these Nagas started to leave. The king of Nagas and so on was leaving, and then Manjushri persuaded them to stay, because otherwise the place would just become a dust bowl. So he requested them to stay, and he promised them that the human beings that would occupy the place would make offerings on a regular basis. And then there were other generations of Manjushri who came later, and one of the other ones wrote a special puja for that purpose, because one time there was some illness. The Nagas was said to cause certain type of illnesses. And so there was this terrible illness throughout the valley, and so this emanation of Manjushri wrote a method to be recited, and it worked. It purified this terrible illness. And then the king of Nepal was to be the caretaker. And so there was this one there's this one hill just outside of Kathmandu called Swayambhu. And Swayambhu is famous because when there was this inland sea there, it was the top of the hill was an island, and it had a natural flame on it, like escaping gas, and that was a flame. And so this, it was, people regarded it, well, it was so very unusual, so they attached all kinds of significance to it. And then this, later on, when the water was removed and the Buddhists came, then they built this stupa over it, and that's called the Swayambhu stupa. But there's this other temple there that has a doorway and a stairway that goes down deep into the hill, into the land of the Nagas. And that's where that text was kept. And whenever, if an illness like this occurred again, then the king of Nepal, who should have been told, the lineage of this from his father and on and on and on, should go down there and collect this text and recite it. And it happened one time like that. So anyway, Manjusri and Lama Tsongkhapa had a relationship. Initially, Lama Tsongkhapa, he found somebody who could, I suppose you could say, channeled Manjusri, or was a medium for Manjusri, and so he would hang out with that lama, and ask questions, and that lama would be the medium and give the answers to Manjusri, and then, or give the answers to Lama Tsongkhapa, and then that lama said, you don't need me for this. And so then Lama Tsongkhapa was inspired, and then he did whatever and developed this relationship. So Manjusri was considered the kind of secret guru of Lama Tsongkhapa, or like the special guru of Lama Tsongkhapa, something like that. So he taught Lama Tsongkhapa this one prayer, and in it you're developing these three attitudes, and one of those is renunciation. So that's the attitude where you have no interest in the things of cyclic existence, and day and night you have this aspiration to escape from cyclic existence. And the thing he mentioned in this short prayer to contemplate was karma. So by contemplating karma, you can really feel how you're bound by these actions. And as soon as you have a sense of being bound, of being like held back and prevented from doing what you want to do, you immediately want to be free of it. It's just our nature to want to be free. So it's when one thinks about, so in order to generate that wish to be free from cyclic existence, it's important to think about these things that keep one bound, or think about what one is bound to, and the dissatisfactory nature of that. So there's a lot of types of contemplations that are done, like the three types of suffering that exist in cyclic existence: the suffering of pain, the suffering of change, the pervasive conditioning, the suffering of pervasive conditioning. And those are interesting because the suffering of pain is just whatever's painful. It's just all those unwanted experiences that one can have, whether it's a physical pain or a mental, emotional pain, all of those things. One just thinks about it and says, yeah, this is what one faces all the time. And so that's just part of, and you can even think about how one's body and mind is, and they're creations and of so many conditions. The body, obviously, but even in one's mind, it is one functions on the basis of so many concepts that you've acquired through having learned them, or either unconsciously in one's culture, or consciously through studies. But there's many of these concepts, and sometimes these concepts are conflicting, and sometimes these concepts are, we identify with ideas of what we should be, and then we we run into conflicts where we're not what we should be. And so there's all kinds of emotional problems and physical problems, like illnesses and so on, or being too hot or being too cold, being hungry, being too full, being thirsty, drowning. There's no end to it, but sometimes it's good to actually spend some time thinking about that. And because what we're trying to do is to, unleash the spirit of to be free within us. And so then when one thinks about the suffering of change, then what you think about are when good things are happening, because that's the basis for the suffering of change. Because no matter how good it is, it changes. It never stays. You can never seem to maintain that good feeling, the good health, or even like the examples would be like if you're hungry and you start to eat, and then as you're eating, the hunger pains decreases in one's mind. But as one continues to eat, the suffering of being too full is gradually increasing. And so the pleasure of eating is that moment in the middle when the suffering of the pangs of hunger are declining and the suffering of being too full are increasing. And that little part in the middle is the happiness. And but the basis of that happiness is suffering like that. So that way of thinking causes one to become detached to a lot of things, and to recognize that the existence that one is in is flawed. It's just flawed. No matter how good it gets, there's a basic flaw to it. And you can do that with eating, you can do that with, like you can be standing for a long time. Or let's say, a lot of people these days are sitting in front of a computer. And so you're sitting and, your back starts to hurt or whatever. And so then you get up and you do some stretches, you walk around, and then he says, enough of this, I want to sit down. So it's the same thing as, the suffering of sitting is declining, but then the suffering of standing and walk around is increasing. And that little moment there is like the relief, the pleasure of relief, which is called happiness, but it's not very long lasting. So that's the suffering of change. And then the pervasive conditioning is one is those times when one is just having a neutral experience. It's neither pleasurable nor painful. But at any moment, it's going to change into one of those two. And if it changes into pleasure, that's the suffering of change. If it changes into unhappiness or discomfort, that's the suffering of pain, like that. So at any moment, it can go like that. And it's hard to control that, because when you think about, we identify with our bodies, and our bodies are, made of so many things, and it's not as if we put it together carefully. It's just functions the way it's supposed to function, not because somebody is controlling it. It's just that, that's the way bodies have functioned for a long time, and hopefully mine will function properly, just like other proper bodies function like that. But who knows? At any moment something can go wrong. Little viruses, the flu that came around this last season just laid people on their backs for at least a week, and how big and mean is that virus? You can't even see it. It's tiny, and just changes in the weather can cause our unbalances to occur within our bodies, and can weaken our immune system just enough so that some simple little organism can cause one to get ill. And then even the things that we do to for our health, like exercise. There's many people who hurt themselves while they're doing exercise. The person who made jogging famous died of a heart attack while he was jogging. There's so many things like that, and food, good food, but people die by choking on food, things like this. So we're so conditioned, and yet that's our existence. That's so when one is thinking about that, it's like one starts to think, wow, and let's not be so romantic about this existence, because it's not that big a bargain. Relatively speaking, it could be worse, but it in itself is not a great bargain. And of course, you run into the great sufferings of the human being, which is the four great sufferings of the human being are birth, aging, sickness, and death, like that. So the suffering of birth, it's when you think about the baby who's still in the womb, the fetus, and once it's developed the sensory organs, and it can feel heat and cold and things like that, or feel being squashed, depending upon the kind of food that the mother is eating, or her exercise, or whatever she's doing. The baby's just in there, and eventually the space is just too tight. And I love this one expression that I read about this, the different sufferings of in the womb, and saying, and then the baby contemplates escaping. And so then this baby has to get through that tiny little opening, and generally speaking, when they're coming out of that, it's not pleasant for the baby, because its skin is extraordinarily sensitive, right? It hasn't developed any insensitivity from daily life and calluses and stuff like that. Its skin is incredibly sensitive, and yet it's forced through this, and its bones are being kind of crushed as it's coming through, and then it comes out, and there's very few stories of babies smiling and saying, "Oh, sorry if I caused you any trouble for the last 9 months, Mom." And they usually are in bad shape, and then what happens? The first thing, they get a slap on the bottom to make them start to breathe. Welcome to the human realm. And then they get wrapped in as soft a blanket as possible. But remember, their skin is very, very sensitive. So what we regard as soft, with hands that have been exposed to the weather and the elements and work for tens of decades like that, they have not. So even something that's soft to us can be harsh and uncomfortable to them. So, and then having to grow up, and it takes so long for human beings to be self-sufficient. And so then you have to learn everything, and meanwhile other people have to take care of you and feed you and wash you and all this kind of stuff, and train you, and then great, then you can be on your own and spend the next, 60 years working to stay alive. Great, and then at the end you die. And then you have to go through it again. You have to go through it again. And what terrifies me is going to high school again. But that would be a good thing. That would be born as a human being, where there are high schools and stuff like that. But there's all kinds of rebirths that one can have. It's all just a crapshoot. You have. Which one is going to ripen at the time of death? Try your best to make sure that your mind is in a positive state, so a positive karma ripens. But who knows how we're going to be at the time of death? it takes a lifetime of practice to get, the mind in such a state that however one dies, one's mind will be in a positive state, so that positive karma will ripen. So then, by thinking like this, this is just too risky. It's just too risky. And why would I want to risk it? I mean, what's the prize? There's no prize. And one even thinks about, well, good karma, you can be born as a god. And, and, the human concepts of gods is just like the human existence, but everything is better, right? So, especially the gods of the desire realm. So everything is better, and you live longer, and you're more beautiful, and you've got all these incredible jewels, and your friends are just wonderful, and conversations are just, sublime, and everybody's so good and polite to each other, and like that, and you can just go here and there or anywhere you want to go, and it's one party after the next, and one beautiful place after the next. It's like you go to the Greek islands for a party, and then you go to Italy for a party, and like Lake Como for a party, and it's one right after the other, but all much better than those, inconceivably better than those places. And but then the karma runs out. And once the karma runs out, your glow starts to fade. The flowers that you wear around you start to wilt. Your body starts to produce aromas that your friends can't tolerate, and they stay far away from you. You become shunned. Because your mind is still a product of virtue, you might have some clairvoyances, and you can see where you're going to be reborn and be terrified of that. So the death of the god is considered to be as much suffering on an emotional level as the physical suffering of beings in the worst states, the hells and so on. So it's no great bargain either. And that's the best that karma can do. It's no great bargain. So one really thinks about, well, there's no reason to dedicate myself to any kind of rebirth. I have to find an escape from this situation. And so how does one escape this uncontrolled cycle of death and rebirth? And that's where you have the three higher trainings. The higher training in ethics, the higher training in concentration, and the higher training in wisdom. And so the higher training in ethics is following the pure morality. There's also, on top of that, one can practice the morality of taking vows. There's the tradition of 24-hour vows, where one takes the vows of a fully ordained monk or a nun for just 24 hours. Not all the vows that they have, but 8 of them, like that. And with the bodhicitta motivation, then it becomes a Mahayana activity. And so within the tradition, it's well known, like the Kopan course, the 1-month Kopan course in Kathmandu Valley. It lasts for 4 weeks, and the last 2 weeks you take the Mahayana precepts every day. So you live like a monk or nun every day, eat once a day, get up early in the morning before the sun rises to retake the vows, because they're only good for 24 hours. And then you don't lie, so you take a vow not to lie. So the practice of the course is to keep silent, so that there's not the opportunity to lie, things like that. And somebody else is cooking your food, so you don't have to kill anything, like that. So that's where I got introduced to the 24-hour vows. But I thought they were all in the Mahayana tradition, but then I also learned And like in the Theravadan tradition also, there's the 24-hour vows that give it to a person a sense of what it's like to be a monk or nun. And then you do this practice for 24 hours, you dedicate the merit, and like that. But the practice of morality is done to achieve liberation in order to make the mind calm and peaceful, to avoid engaging in actions that cause the remorse to arise. And remorse or regret, it has good features, but one of the bad features of it is that as soon as it arises in your mind, if you're trying to concentrate on something, your concentration is broken immediately. You know, like, and if you've done any meditation, you've had the experience of, as you meditate, your mind becomes, you know, more calm and less filled with activity, mental thinking, of planning, and whatever the busy work of the day has been, and it's calm. And when it gets calm, you can use that calmness for concentration on some practice that you're doing, but also there's this kind of subterranean river of thought going on down there that you begin more to access. And that's like memories, and people complain about having bad memories. It's all there. It's all there, and it can just come to the surface. And if it's a bad memory, then the suffering of remorse arises, and you're immediately distracted from whatever you're meditating on. So one of the purposes of taking vows is to prevent that from happening. Number one, you avoid the kind of actions that you would feel remorseful about. And number two, you've decided that you've become a different kind of person than the person that created those actions in the past. Because now you're a person who has vows not to engage in such an action. So you're different now. And so that also helps to lessen or mitigate the risk of those things arising. And then the higher training and concentration, of course, it's obvious you're practicing and putting concentration, so your mind becomes a fit tool for the wisdom cultivation. And the wisdom cultivation is the analysis into the way in which things exist, especially the way in which oneself exists, and then also how one's aggregates of body and mind exist. Because although good concentration can cause disturbing negative thoughts to hibernate so they don't arise, the seeds for those are still present in the mind. So there are people who, through the practice of concentration, feel like they've achieved liberation because, like, anger no longer arises in their mind, desire for objects of the senses no longer arises in the mind like that. So they feel like they've achieved the liberation from the causes of uncontrolled death and rebirth. The causes are karma and the mental afflictions. So, and the mental afflictions are what motivates the actions that are called karma to then produce rebirths. So if you can eliminate those mental afflictions, then you're going to be free. So they don't see these afflictions arising in their mind anymore through the power of their concentration. So they mistakenly think that they're free, but in fact, they've just caused their mind to subdue on a temporary basis those afflictions. The propensities are still in the mind. And when the concentration weakens, then you meet conditions where those propensities arise again. And those it can be, certain objects that one comes in contact with that can cause a propensity of, say, anger or attachment to arise. There can be bad friends that mislead you and cause you to view something that's negative as positive, so that they can be causes for that, for those propensities to arise. It could be just the propensity has extra strength attached to it because it was a very habitual action, and so one has this propensity to engage in a certain type of action that like just naturally leads to disturbing negative thoughts arising. There's a lot of conditions that can cause these propensities to be activated. So, but in order to eliminate that, then the Buddha said what you need is wisdom. The wisdom is to remove the wrong view that we have about ourselves and everything else. When we start with ourselves, because it's the closest thing, and recognize that we have all kinds of conceptions about ourselves. But what are we really without any of those conceptions? Those conceptions we learn and so on, but we were already there before we learned these conceptions, and then we have these conceptions that we're perceiving ourselves on the basis of. And and these conceptions are just fabrications of thought and language. So what are we really, kind of thing? And so the Buddha had his own answer to that question, and we'll get into that, I think, at the last session. But I wanted to just touch generally what these three higher trainings are. So, so there's other, this type of the contemplation of suffering. There's many different types of suffering. As I mentioned, as a human being, you have the four great sufferings, and then there's the four other sufferings that the human beings have, such as this not getting what you want, and instead of that, you get what you don't want, and then it can happen that you get what you want, but then it's disappointing. And then just the suffering of being the insecurity that anything can go wrong at any time. So you can see how some of these get folded into those three major sufferings. There's another list of sufferings that I have to refer to the text because my memory is not so good for it, but like the suffering of no certainty. So you have no idea what kind of birth you're going to have, right? There's no certainty because any karma can ripen at the time of death. Then the next one is no satisfaction. If you think about, and I love some of these examples, they're kind of poetic, that the amount of mother's milk that you have drunk as a baby could fill and overflow all the oceans of the earth because of having been a baby beginningless time and sucked on one's mother's breasts from numerous, countless times. So the amount of milk that one has consumed could fill and overflow all the oceans, and still one will have to suck more milk. Still one needs to eat, like no matter how much one has eaten, one needs to eat more. No matter how good a day you had yesterday, you're looking for more good things today. It's not as if something is, good enough. I don't have to see movies anymore. Good enough. Oh, I don't have to go to a restaurant anymore. That was the best meal I could ever have. Good enough. Those shoes were the best shoes I've ever had. I don't need any other shoes besides those. Good enough. It's never like that, is it? It's always, always something, I need something more like that. So suffering of dissatisfaction. Having to abandon your body repeatedly. The biggest mountain range in the world is the Himalayan mountains, the highest, and that range is quite wide, and there's other ranges that have different names, but it's still the same basic mountain range where the subcontinent of India plowed into Asia and everything went up in the air. So that mountain range is the biggest. But if you piled up the bones of all the bodies that you've had in the past, it would dwarf the Himalayas. So this body we have now is just one of countless bodies that we've had. And we look at ourselves and as if that's our totality. But this is just the most recent body that we've had. You look back and it's just, it would cover the earth. You could have the earth made of all the bones, and it still wouldn't be enough. You'd have to have all the planets in the solar system that were filled with the bones of our former lifetimes, and more, because there's no beginning to it. So we're so kind of deceived, really, in thinking that this is our totality. This is just one body, our current body that we have. But so many we've had in the past, and we've been just as attached to all of them. Investing in each of them as our personal identity. When we think of ourselves, we use the characteristics of our body to identify our characteristics, even though they're not the same. Like there's me and there's my body. There's a separation between me and my body. I'm the possessor of the body, and I'm the possessor of the mind. So we don't see them as identical. And yet, I don't have any characteristic other than the characteristics I borrow from the body and the mind. I think, I walk, those are all mental or physical activities. So we're so invested in this particular body, but we're going to have to abandon it, just like we've abandoned all of those in the past. It's I guess it would be similar to the army brat who has to move from house to house because their father is going stationed every 2 years in a different place, so have to pick up and move and go into a different house, and go to a different school and make new friends and go through that whole hassle every 2 years again and again and again. If you think about it, that's a hassle. I mean, if you've ever moved when you're a kid, even one move is traumatic, right? So let alone the children of somebody in the army that has to move every 2 years like that. Well, that's only for the first, say, 18 years of your life. We've been moving countless times from beginningless time, from one abode to the next, So no matter how comfortable you might feel with this current abode, it's just like a motel on the highway. We're going to pass through. So then the suffering of taking rebirth. And so you abandon the one, then you have to acquire another. You're going to acquire another, and acquire another, another and another and another and another. And it just keeps going. And there's no end to it unless you're able to apply the antidote to the causes that make it keep going. Otherwise, it just keeps going. And so I have to go through all of the stuff again that you've gone through countless times. People get depressed by like jobs on the assembly line where you have to do the same thing, same task again and again and again and again. Or, like cooking food, every day, again and again and again, having to think about, well, what's to cook and what do they want and is it good enough, and again and again and again and again, and having to clean the room. There's your mother saying, clean that room, and again and again and again and again, like that. So you get kind of bored with having to do these things again and again. Can't you just clean something once and it stays? How many times have I heard that? Well, it's like that. I mean, we have to go think. When you think about it, all the things that you've had to do to survive and achieve a kind of comfort level, all those things, the choices that you've had to make, the kind of interests that you may have, and trying to cultivate those interests, getting parents to provide you with certain toys or hobbies and stuff like that, and then getting studying to acquire the ability to go into higher education, cultivating to be able to get a job that you can support the kind of lifestyle you would like to live, and various kind of talents that you've cultivated to get to know people and to identify good friends and to sustain those relationships, the things that you've had to do to try to stay healthy, the things that you do to enjoy, to have fun, and all of that effort, again and again and again and again, you're going to have to do, unless you can achieve liberation from it. The changing status repeatedly from exalted to humble. So you can get just like somebody who say they inherit money that was left behind from their parents, and now they don't have to save and scrimp for as long as the inheritance lasts. But then when they spend the last dollar of the inheritance, they can't afford to get a new car or to get their car fixed, and without going into debt, and then they're in debt, and maybe they can't pay the debt, and then they get telephone calls from collection agencies, and then that makes them miserable, and then their friends don't like to be around them anymore because they're only complaining about everything, and then you become more isolated, and you go from everything being cool to then being so depressed that you can't wait for death, kind of thing. So, from high to low, it goes like that. And let alone rebirths. You can get the rebirth of a god, but the next rebirth could be as a worm. It just depends on what karma ripens. So it's just high to low, all the time, that kind of changeability. And the last of those six, the six general sufferings of cyclic existence is essentially being alone. You're born alone, you die alone, you experience the sufferings of life, the happiness, and you experience all that alone. And you might want other people, to share the good things with other people, but they have their own experience of that. It may not be the same as yours. It's your own experience. And these experiences are the results of the actions that one has done in the past. One has a good experience that came from some virtuous action one did in the past. One has a bad experience that came from a non-virtuous action one did in the past. And so there are activities that you engage in as a group, and so then the whole group can have a similar result. But each of us is different, so we each have a little bit of different things that's going to make our own experiences unique to ourselves. And that's it just makes one alone. You feel just like that. And it's our nature as human beings. We're social creatures. Our whole life depends on others. Without our parents, we couldn't exist. Without them taking care of us, we wouldn't have survived to adulthood. And then even our survival as adults depends upon others. Even if you have your own business, you depend upon others as customers. You depend upon others as like the workers that you hire. You depend upon others as suppliers. We are social. So that's why even a person who is more or less like an introvert is somebody who gets energy from within themselves. An extrovert, they get energy from others. Like, for instance, at the end of the day, an extrovert will go home and immediately be on the phone, and that gets them energized. An introvert will, like pick up a book and will read it, and that'll get them energized like that. But even an introvert needs social company. They'll go out, and interact with people, maybe just for a little while, but definitely they do. So we are social beings, so we don't like to be alone. We can't survive being alone, totally alone. And yet, on some level, we are alone. So it is, that has its disadvantages, but one of the things that makes us more alone than we need to be is the concept that we have about ourselves. And we have this concept of ourselves as being this entity that exists in its own right, and that creates a view of others as existing in their own right. So we're like individual drops of oil just floating around separately. and in fact, we're not really so separate and distinct. But this view that views us as existing in our own right as this self-sustaining, independent entities creates a gulf that kind of violates the interdependence or denies the interdependence that exists of our being. Our being is an interdependent being. So in fact, there's no way we can be alone. And just if you're in a room and nobody else is there, a person who understands this doesn't necessarily feel alone. They understand that all the beings who built the room. One is abiding in an environment created by countless beings. So it's hard to feel alone when you understand that kind of thing. So, but because of the nature of cyclic existence and the mental state that has created it, then this is one of the sufferings that one gets.
Pende, we're past 10:15. We're at 10:17.
Thank you for reminding me. My daughter's getting another ride today, so she's not depending upon me. So I'm not worried about the time today.
Okay.
But thanks for being my timekeeper. So the subject of this whole subject is expanded on in some other texts. Like, for instance, there's a text of mind and its functions, or the primary minds and mental factors, and the mental factors. Usually, it's taught in the Tibetan tradition, and it's derived from two great Indian masters. They were brothers, Asanga and his brother Vasubandhu. They wrote. Vasubandhu wrote the Treasury of Knowledge, and his older brother Asanga wrote the Continuum of Knowledge. And they described all these mental factors, including virtuous mental factors and non-virtuous mental factors. And it's the non-virtuous mental factors, and there's other mental factors that cause, especially the mental factor of this root ignorance, that caused this uncontrolled cycle to go on and on and on. So that's the Buddha said with the Four Noble Truths: we're suffering. You have to be aware of that, acknowledge that, and he said, but suffering has its cause. It's not without cause. It has a cause. And the cause is the afflictions and the actions motivated by the afflictions. And the short word for actions motivated by the afflictions is karma. And then, but he said, there is a way to end those causes, and then there'll be a cessation of suffering. And then he said, and there is a path that leads to that cessation, because it uproots that root ignorance that is the foundation for all the other disturbing negative thoughts, and is the principal force behind recreating this conditioned existence again and again and again. So there's many things that one can contemplate with this, especially to generate this mind of renunciation, which is it's an attitude that wants to emerge, to escape from this conditioned existence. So you only. I once was contemplating this one time, and this image came in my mind of a very insidious prison where the people who are in the prison don't know that they're prisoners.
Yeah.
but they keep disappearing from time to time because they're being executed, right? But they don't know they're prisoners, and they don't know they're under such a threat because they, grabbed in the middle of the night and nobody else is around to see it, and they're gone. So they don't know they're under threat. And but as soon as, say, one of them discovers that this whole thing is a prison, then the thought arises, I have to escape, like that. And so then, day and night, they start trying to figure out how to escape from this kind of existence. And there was some movie that there's a movie that there's more than one. There was 1 year where there were these movies that came out. They all had a similar theme, to where people were living lives that were completely artificial and they didn't know it. But then, as soon as like one of them discovered it, then they had to escape. The Truman Show, is that it?
Yeah.
That was like that, right? As soon as he discovered that he was in an artificial environment and none of it was real, he had to escape, even if it meant putting his life on the line, like when on the boat and the storm came and all that. He would not give up. And that's the kind of attitude we need to be, the great practitioners that we can be. But it takes an effort, because we're kind of living in an illusion that has a certain kind of attractiveness to it, and it's hard to overcome that. Yes.
Eventually, does that effort become surrender?
That
long-term, is that something to aspire towards? Is eventually that effort softens into surrender?
It's important to aspire for this the attitude of to escape from this existence, and there's one word that it's called renunciation. The Tibetan word more literally translates as emerge, an emergent attitude, which is, I think, is more characterized by escape. But it's kind of, well, you think of a butterfly emerging from the cocoon kind of thing, right? And so it's escaping. Like there's in my Facebook banner page, there's this one image that I have always liked, and it comes from the what's the name of it? The alchemist tradition, and there's a young shepherd who's in a realm, in like a hemisphere, and he sticks his head through it and then can see this whole universe that his little world is only one part of, kind of thing. So it's a good model of this emergent attitude. But in order to do it, you have to overcome this the illusion, being attracted to the illusion. You have to actually see it as a state of non-freedom that one is in. And like I said, as soon as you are able to generate that recognition that one is in a state of non-freedom, then this wish to be free will just arise naturally. Just arises naturally. So, but in order to see that one is in this state of non-freedom, it requires this willingness to go beyond a comfort level that one has of traffic in LA is a hassle, but it's my hassle. I'm familiar with it kind of thing. You know, I'm familiar with life here, and so there's a certain kind of security that comes from the familiar, you know. But here, one's being directed to a way of thinking that's unfamiliar. Looking at some of these things, am I really satisfied with this, or am I just thinking that I don't think there's an alternative, so I just make the best, and I call it satisfaction, because I don't think there's an alternative, but there is an alternative. That's the good news. There is an alternative, and that gives one some strength and willingness to look at the familiar as not being as great as one thought. You know, like there was this one. There were several directors, movie directors. David Lynch was one of them, who he loved taking familiar environments and uncovering it to expose, the worst, like Blue Velvet or some of these other Twin Peaks, some of these other things where this ideal community in the mountains, or this nice town with, everybody's taking care of their lawns, and some kid is cutting through an empty lot and from coming home from school and finds a severed human ear. Or the people that are cutting their lawns, the camera focuses in on the lawn, and you see this the horror of the insect realm, beings eating each other and stuff like that. So it's all there, right? But I can look out. I'm in my office now, and I look out, and there's this hills covered with beautiful trees, and a swimming pool down below, and people swimming in it, and it's kind of nice. But be careful where you walk, or you're going to get poison oak, So it's like that. You have to be aware of those things, and to counter that sense of that this is it. This is all there is, and and I should be happy. We're taught as we grow up. Look for the silver lining. Practice contentment. We're taught all of these things, but and even the Buddha would teach those things in a little bit different context. But you have to be careful, because if you don't, you won't recognize the prison that you're in, and nobody survives it. We're all being picked off one at a time, executed. We've all taken the poison. We've all been bitten by the asp just by being born. So far, that's the only necessary cause to die, is being born. So so thinking like that will cause this attitude, this emergent attitude, to grow within one, and then, just as Lama Tsongkhapa said in his 3 Principles of the Path, that one takes no interest in the things of cyclic existence, and thinks day and night how one is going to escape from it. So that's the kind of training that the Bodhisattva does, and that's in common with the person of intermediate scope. And so next week we start the trainings that are unique to the universal vehicle, or the Bodhisattva path. So thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you all again. And if there's anything you heard today that you found useful, then try not to forget it. That way it can be continuously useful. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Pende.
you.